I feel like it's been a long time coming. So, three or 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, something like that, I read a book that really changed, um, or not so much changed, but sort of exemplified a lot of the things that I had been feeling and thinking about and worried about, and sort of mirrored. I have this hair that's sticking out over here that's annoying. Mirrored a lot of what I had been, well, like I said, like thinking and my mindset. And hello, Nick. How are you doing? I love your avatar. It's really nice. It fits so well. Like it fits the circle so well. It's nicely thought out. Hey, Q. Yeah, just sort of last minute unable to sleep and feel like a lot of the stuff that we have talked about and a lot of the things that we've discussed over the past year, a lot of it for me, and this is not to say that I didn't read or was not into existentialism or nihilism or antinatalism or negative utilitarianism or all the things that we always talk about when it comes to schools of thought in philosophy that include, hi Pete Knox, how are you doing? That include the idea that consciousness is a mistake, was a mistake. Hi Chen Chen, how are you doing? And I'd always been into horror and into horror novels and all that kind of stuff. And when I read Conspiracy Against the Human Race, what struck me about it most was the two things earlier, like I said a moment ago, how it echoed a lot of the things. And it's a book that largely cites other sources, which is fine. Most books do that, and it brings them together in a way to sort of formulate its own spin on an idea. But again, Thomas Ligotti is a horror fiction writer, and what to me was a bit of a revelation about this book was it seemed to me intended to horrify readers who might not be horrified by more standard horror fare, and that is by presenting reality in such a way that it's horrifying. Hi, slim, thick, skinny queen, Chen Chen, and thank God. Thanks God. So I guess I just felt like it's informed so much of, I mean, honestly, like it kind of was, I don't even, like, I feel like it had a negative net effect on my life. I don't know but the negative net effect came from my opinion, like knowing something. Hey, Jessica, how are you doing? Writing a bullshit paper. Maybe not the best thing to have it on the background, I don't know. PG, how are you doing? Yeah, it's late. It's almost midnight here. And I haven't even started. So anyway, I feel like it probably had a bit of a negative net effect on my life, but I wouldn't undo it. I wouldn't unread it. Um, and I've recommended it to a lot of people, and some of the people that I've recommended it to um, chose not to finish it. Some of them thought it was flowery and overly melodramatic, and it is. He's a fiction writer writing philosophy. So if you approach this as a philosophy book, you're gonna be like, well, why is it being written in this way? But for one, I love like good prose, right? Or to me, what I feel like is good prose, and that is probably the prose that I like is probably, although I feel like I like both extremes. I love really stark, purely like these are the facts. This is the facts. This is Hemingway, right? This is Faulkner, and then I like, the Cormac McCarthy's, and I would put Thomas Ligotti. Cormac McCarthy is probably one of my favorite writers if we're just going off prose. But Thomas Ligotti is one of my favorite writers if we're going off both together, the content and the prose. A book club in the Discord, that would be great. I'd love that. That could be fun. But anyway, because this has informed so much of what I feel like we base a lot of our discussions on, although it is not a primary source for a lot of that stuff, it is the book that sort of kicked it off for me at this stage in my life, which is, like I said, is not to say that it wasn't kicked off for me by other things at other stages in my life. So I thought, I have a bunch of notes that I've written in this book, as I tend to do. And so this won't be like just a straight reading, but I wanted to just go ahead and do it, because maybe this is a book that you're interested in, and maybe it's a book that you want to discuss, and definitely not going to get through even like a quarter of it, in this reading. So if people want to read it and talk about it with me, that'd be great too. Be happy to bring people in and discuss. So let's get started. I'm gonna skip past the preface, but I'm not gonna skip past the introduction, because that is written by Thomas Ligotti, and it's called. So the introduction is called "Of Pessimism and Paradox." So here it is: Conspiracy Against the Human Race. Thomas Ligotti. In his study The Nature of Evil, Radoslav A. Sanov cites a terse reflection set down by the German philosopher Julius Bonson in 1847, when he was 17 years old. Man is a self-conscious nothing, wrote Bonson. Whether one considers these words to be juvenile or precocious, and I find that line. So, okay, first pause. This is going to derail a lot. So I find that line interesting, because juvenile or precocious, we've talked about this before, like, seems like when it comes to the sort of despairing schools of philosophy, most people take up those writers and those interests, like maybe in high school. Right, that's where they start to read Nietzsche and Sartre and Goethe, and they go through that phase. This is what it seems like. Could be totally wrong. You go through that phase of being dour and nihilistic and sort of in a juvenile way. You're 17 years old and you're lamenting, and just because you're young, it doesn't mean you're wrong. And just because you either move on from that way of thinking and come back to it, or just because you either you get interested by other things, or maybe you get a little tired of sort of banging that drum over and over again. And maybe, a lot of people also, right, they start to be interested in things that excite them for a time, whether that be, finding a partner, starting a family, the yoke that is lifted from you once you turn 18, once you are out of high school, out of college. See, or there you go, Q, right? Like some people get there and don't leave it. I left it. I think a lot of people do leave it. But then people come back to it. So I sometimes get like that when I will be talking about this with other people. I'll get that. Yeah. I read that in high school. I read that kind of stuff in high school. I outgrew it. And I think that is bullshit. I think that is, you outgrew it. Wait till you grow into it again. And you'll be looking at it from a different place. And, you might realize that it was the middle part of your life that was bullshit. Anyway, so whether one considers these words, back to the reading now. So whether one considers these words to be juvenile or precocious, they belong to an ancient tradition of scorn for our species and its aspirations. All the same, the reigning sentiments on the human venture normally fall between qualified approval and loud-mouthed braggadocio. As a rule, anyone desirous of an audience, or even a place in society, might profit from the following motto. If you can't say something positive about humanity, then say something equivocal. Hi, Maddie. You should be asleep. But glad you're saying hi. So this is true. You can see this there's nothing wonderful about, you'd be hard pressed to find a pessimistic philosopher in history who had a good life, who had a prosperous life, or who was accepted pre-mortem or lauded pre-mortem, or not living as a wastrel or off the goodwill of someone else pre-mortem. Someone who, you'd be hard pressed to find a pessimistic philosopher who was successful while they were alive. And I'm not including that period of time where you had wastrels, right? Or not wastrels, but people who had money and didn't necessarily need to work, had large families or large families with money and didn't really need to make an income in order to survive. So, Farmer Duck is about a communist workers' revolution. Sounds good. But that phrase there, if you can't say something positive about humanity, then say something equivocal. So either be an optimist or at least leave some room for someone to wiggle out the glint of, give people some hope. This to me is very Hollywood. It is the traditional happy ending kind of thing, or the at least leaving things open to interpretation enough that you could interpret a happy ending, and you give people the ability to do that. Hello, Pink Moon. Emo for life. Yeah. I do think people do get tired of hearing about it, right? As Nick Pizzolatto put it, if you would ask me what I was philosophically, what am I? I'm a pessimist. What does that mean? It means I'm not good at parties. You're not so good outside of parties either. Anyway, so back to it. Returning to Bonson, he grew up to become a philosopher who not only had nothing either positive or equivocal to say about humanity, but who also arrived at a dour assessment of all existence. Like many who have tried their hand at metaphysics, Bonson declared that, appearances to the contrary, all reality is the expression of a unified, unchanging force, a cosmic movement that various philosophers have characterized in various ways. To Bonson, this force and its movement were monstrous in nature, resulting in a universe of indiscriminate butchery and mutual slaughter among its individuated parts. Additionally, the universe, according to Bonson, has never had a hint of design or direction. From the beginning, it was a play with no plot and no players that were anything more than portions of a master drive of purposeless self-mutilation. I'll pause here again to mention that I was listening to a book by Brian Evanson today called Last Hours. And the reason that I bring it up is because I like Brian Evanson a lot. I like his short stories. This is I guess it's a novel. It's a short novel. It's like 250 pages. And I liked this. I don't find his prose anywhere near the level of Ligotti or anything, but he wrote the story about the short story about the girl. No matter what way we turned her, there was no face, essentially, right? And actually the writing in that short story I think is really strong. In this novel, Last Days, it's pretty pedantic noir detective writing. It's about a man who was forced to cut off his own hand. His hand was cut off because someone was trying to kill him, and he cauterized it on a hot plate and killed the guy. And he's then sought out by this cult who try to achieve some kind of transcendental state through self-mutilation, essentially lopping off their own body parts. And, it puts a bit of a philosophical spin on it, in that you're becoming more and more of your attachment. People talk about like losing your material attachments to this world, but a more radical way of looking at that would be, well, your own body is also an attachment to this world. So this cult exists, and they have numbers. They're basically ranked by numbers, and numbers representing how many amputations they've had. And in a way, I did find it a little distasteful, right? For people who obviously wouldn't choose to be in this situation, but are and didn't choose to be. And anyway, the reason I brought that up was because they were talking about purposeless self-mutilation. This book was about purposeful self-mutilation. So they bring this guy in to essentially solve a murder that happened in this cult. And if it weren't for the shock value and the sort of philosophical bent on why they're talking about why they do what they do, this would just be like a bog standard murder mystery. So it's interesting. It was an interesting read, but I wouldn't put it up there with his best. Back to the reading. In Bonson's philosophy, Everything is engaged in a discorded fantasia of carnage. Everything tears away at everything else forever. Yet all this commotion in nothingness goes unnoticed by nearly everything involved in it. In the world of nature, as an instance, nothing knows of its embroilment in a festival of massacres. Just phrases like that I love, like just festival of massacres. Great. Only Bonson's self-conscious nothing can know what is going on and be shaken by the tremors of chaos at feast. Chaos at feast, right? A festival of massacres, a discorded fantasia of carnage. People might find some of those things silly. I think they're kind of cool. Jane Doe, hello. Nice to see you. I'm sure I've seen you before. PG, benevolent nihilism is going pretty good for you. Good. Good. Excellent. I have to admit that, I don't feel like my worldview is particularly useful for me. I don't know that it's working for me. But God help me, I cannot do otherwise. Back to the reading. As with all pessimistic philosophies, Bonson's rendering of existence as something strange and awful was unwelcome by the self-conscious nothings whose validation he sought. For better or worse, pessimism without compromise lacks public appeal. In all, the few who have gone to the pains of arguing for a sullen appraisal of life might as well never have been born. As history confirms, people will change their minds about almost anything, from which God they worship to how they style their hair. But when it comes to existential judgments, human beings in general have an unfalteringly good opinion of themselves and their condition in this world, and they are steadfastly confident that they are not a collection of self-conscious nothings. Must all reproof of our species' self-contentment then be renounced? This would be a brilliant decision. Rule number 1 for deviance from the norm. Rule number 2, if you must open your mouth, steer away from debate. Money and love may make the world go round, but disputation with that world cannot get it to budge if it is not of a mind to do so. Thus, British author and Christian apologist G.K. Chesterton. People probably know that name. A Fantasious Festival of Carnage. I'm sorry, you're right, yeah, Fantasia of Carnage. A Festival of Massacre, sorry. Festival of Massacres, Fantasia of Carnage. Thank you for keeping me honest. Slim, thick, skinny queen, Q. Hello, KJ, and hello, Bart. Bart Allen. Bart. "12 hours lo-fi hip-hop beats to relax, study to." Study to. I don't know. I can't give you 12 hours, but I actually am interested to hear that. Samantha, hello. Carnival of Carnage. Yeah, it's alliterative. Anyway, so G.K. Chesterton, you can only find truth with logic if you have already found truth without it. I love that. If you're only using logic to find truth, you're up a creek. What Chesterton means to say here is logic is irrelevant to truth, because if you can find truth without logic, then logic is superfluous to any truth-finding effort. Indeed, his only motive for bringing logic into his formulation is to taunt those who find logic quite relevant to finding truth, although not the kind of truth that was pivotal to Chesterton's morale as a Christian. Hi, Matt Gilmore. How are you doing? I like your cat. Renowned for stating his convictions in the form of a paradox, as above, Chesterton, along with anyone who has something positive or equivocal to say about the human race, comes out on top in the crusade for truth. I like Chesterton, too. But, Ligotti here is taking the hard line, and I respect that. Therefore, should your truth run counter to that of the individuals who devise or applaud paradoxes that stiff up the status quo, you would be well advised to take your arguments, tear them up, and throw them in someone else's garbage. Don't even throw them in your own garbage. Gotta throw them in somebody else's garbage. Whoa. So there was something I saw, a meme or something like that going around. People admitting to the things that they were doing in quarantine that they were ashamed of. And someone admitted to putting their wine bottles in someone else's garbage so that their garbage person wouldn't judge them. Now I have an index card here at this page. And I'm not sure why. My index card says this: every story ultimately has an unhappy ending. If you want a happy ending, you just stop watching at a high point. So if you want to give your own life a happy ending, what is the implication? I'm not sure how that applies to this page. But yeah, my point there is, I think something we've talked about before. Everybody loves a happy ending. And there might be something to be said for going out on top and not at, 90 years old. Well, let's not put an age on it, right? Not in a state where you are miserable, without dignity, without death has a dignity all its own. To be sure, though, futile argumentation has its attractions and may act as an amusing complement to the bitter joy of spewing guttural vituperations, personal idolatries, and rampant pontifications. I get it. I understand why people think, why does this guy use words like this? Like, there's definitely a simpler way to say what he's saying there. But I love it. Like, I love saying the words. Vituperations is, I love that. Rampant pontifications. I like for me, they're evocative. It seems counterintuitive for a sound. Like, why should certain consonants be evocative? Hey, Leah, how are you doing? It's good to see you. Why should certain arrangements of consonants and vowels be more evocative than others? But let's be honest, like the word fuck, right? That has those hard consonants stand on their own. And I think it applies to other things as well. Hey, Lirio, how are you doing? I got some silicone, they're tactile fidget toys. I got them for ASMR purposes, but things I like them a lot. I like them so much that, and I've always, like, if I had this when I was younger, I would have never, I always needed something to fiddle with. I would always have something in my pocket when I was younger. It didn't matter what it was. It was like a totem. Um, I have something in the pocket of my jacket right now. It's a river rock that my son gave me years ago, like 2 years ago. Like we were just at a river and he just picked up a rock and gave it to me. And I have it and I just kind of, I sometimes just have to grip something. And I'll do that at work too. Like at work, I would have to have something in my pocket that I'm holding on Zoom. And obviously it's just, off camera, but I might be during a meeting, like gripping something rather tightly, or playing with something that doesn't make noise, because I have those tendencies. And I was talking with SJ earlier this evening, and was wondering if I might be on the low end of the spectrum. I don't want to disrespect autism at all, by suggesting that just because I feel like I need to always have something to fiddle with, that is indicative of some low level of autism. Let's just say I share some traits with high functioning autistic people. Yeah, it's not even a pretty rock, Hugh, if you're talking about the rock. I've had it now for maybe like 2 or 3 years. It's gotten soft or smooth from me handling it all the time. Oh, see, a pocket watch, that'd be great, because you could actually, a pocket watch you could probably fiddle with in plain view, and people would not be put off by that. They might think you elegant for, yes, you have to have your pocket watch. You have to flip the case open and shut and click it, and the chain makes a lovely sound. Yes. So yeah, maybe I need to, but really like everything. I know we're getting off topic here a little bit, but that's fine. That's what happens here. These things. It was a choice for me this evening to record a hummingbird video, which I'm set up for in the basement, or to do a impromptu live stream. I felt like doing an impromptu live stream. I don't get that excited about doing videos anymore. Pre-recorded videos. Right, Q, right? So you wouldn't... Oh, it's a stopwatch. Well, I guess what I'm saying, if you have some kind of artifact, that gives you some sort of tactile reassurance, similar to a whoopee or a blankie that you might have had as a child. Well, I actually think this thing's pretty good. But the number of times that I've either been in conversation with somebody or in a work meeting, or even not a work meeting, just like a casual get together or something like that, where I've where the thoughts going through my head have been so counter to the experience and what I'm talking about. Slim, it never becomes socially unacceptable to sleep with stuffed animals. I mean, a pillow is essentially an amorphous stuffed animal. Yeah. Got a piece of skin on my lip. That's gross. Sorry. PG, hopefully your chair is supportive. This chair is, oh no, I took the camera back there down because I was outside today doing some macro photography. CPG, I think there's no difference between a pillow, a body pillow, a stuffed animal, a pillow with a shirt on it, a blanket that you have stuffed into a ball, something that you kind of just are able to grab onto. Anyway. Lee LeBrun, hi. It's nice of you to say hi, even if you can't stick around. I appreciate that. All right, so back to it. Back to the gut level vituperations, personal idolatries, and rampant pontifications. Good night, Lee, and PG. If you fall asleep, good night to you as well. To absolve such an unruly application of the rational and the irrational, not that they're ever separable, the present contrivance of horror has been anchored in the thesis of a philosopher who had disquieting thoughts about what it's like to be a member of the human race. But too much should not be telegraphed in this prelude to objection. For the time being, it need only be said that the philosopher in question made much of human existence as a tragedy that need not have been were it not for the intervention in our lives of a single calamitous event. Can you guess what that single calamitous event is in Thomas Ligotti's head? We already said it. I'll wait. What is the single, for none of the money, the single calamitous event that made human existence a tragedy? We're looking for a single calamitous event. No? Birth. Good guess. I mean, without birth, this would not happen. And yeah, I guess really if we're going back to like ideally though, you could still be born and not have this other thing and be much better off, is the argument presented in this book. Okay, I'll just the evolution of consciousness. So the evolution of consciousness as parent of all horrors. He also portrayed humanity as a species of contradictory beings whose continuance only worsens their plight, which is that of mutants who embody the contorted logic of a paradox, a real-life paradox, not a bungled epigram. Even an offhand review of the topic will show that not all paradoxes are alike. Some are merely rhetorical, an apparent contradiction of logic that Adam and Eve, the Big Bang, death, consciousness of death. PG, you pretty much got it there. Really, Geeky Goblin, you have it too, right? Because death is the thing that consciousness brings to the fore. Q, you were close enough. Birth. Without birth, you cannot have the birth of consciousness. So, and anyway, you could argue it's birth anyway. So, if well juggled, may be intelligibly resolved within a specific context. More intriguing are those paradoxes that torture our notions of reality. In the literature of supernatural horror, a familiar storyline is that of a character who encounters a paradox in the flesh, so to speak, and must face down or collapse in horror before this ontological perversion, something which should not be, and yet is. This is every H.P. Lovecraft story. Most fabled as specimens of a living paradox are the undead, those walking cadavers greedy for an eternal presence on earth. But whether their existence should go on unendingly or be cut short by a stake in the heart is not germane to the matter at hand. What is exceedingly material resides in the supernatural horror that such beings could exist in their impossible way for an instant. Other examples of paradox and supernatural horror congealing together are inanimate things guilty of infractions against their nature. Perhaps the most outstanding instance of this phenomenon is a puppet that breaks free of its strings and becomes self-mobilized. Now, he's not bringing this up just out of the blue. This is another recurrent theme of Thomas Ligotti's, and even in his fiction as well, and other philosophers too, right? Humans as puppets, self-conscious puppets. There we go. No. Definitely not. That's not it. I mean, the only reason I thought people might get it is because we just talked about it a bunch. And it's not like the weird things my body does when I drink water. It's not like this is a fact. This is just somebody's, school of thought. It's just an idea. But Q, you always get a pass. And Elliot's here. Elliot is here, which marks both the beginning and the end of the stream. So, good night, all. Mods, be on high alert. So, a puppet, that's another one, right? So you have these idea of these things that are at odds with our notions of what should and should not be. The undead, things that betray their own nature, self-mobilized puppets, etc. For a brief while, let's mull over some of the items of interest regarding puppets. They are made as they are by puppet makers and manipulated to behave in certain ways by a puppet master's will. Okay. Just so you know, you'll notice I have a pop screen on the microphone this evening. I literally got the pop screen because I knew I was going to be reading this book, and I knew that he says the word puppet a lot. And I knew sans pop screen, puppet was going to pop. So that's the only reason this is here, is because of the puppet. And now a brief musical interlude as I continue to try to learn. I know it, but I gotta get good at it now. Marietta. If it sounds like I'm playing a bunch of bullshit, it's because I am. I don't just making stuff up. And I will stop in a moment. All right. Back. Oh, let's see. Wish you recognized more music cue. Well, you wouldn't have recognized any of that because none of that was actual music except for the one bit in the middle. I play Wonderwall all the time. Geeky Goblin, you do ballet? It is a very liberal interpretation of Wonderwall. Oh, thanks, Bart. It's nice. Yeah. So there was obviously like one part there that was it's Francisco Tarrega's Marietta is. That's Francisco Tarrega. He does a lot of stuff that I really like. Jessica, what a bummer. What a bummer there's no super chat. I feel increasingly uncomfortable with super chat. Like I didn't used to. When I didn't know you all, I was happy to take your money. The more that I know you, the shittier I feel about taking money. And yeah, specifically they're talking about Jessica and Q and Flaglow and Nasha and a whole bunch of people I'm probably missing. But Elliot, I don't know that I'm ever going to enable super chats on this channel. It's eligible already. On my old channel, that old channel that I don't really like doing stuff for anymore, you can do it there. Well, Q, this is not true, right? Like I do still take your money. You've got, yeah, you got to stop. Howdy, friends. I like your avatar too. Well, yeah, that's true, Jessica, but I guess I'm just saying the more I relate to people and can associate personalities with names, the more uncomfortable I feel taking money, especially because, look, I have a job. This is not what I do for money. This is what I do for fun. There was a time where I was like, it'd be great if this could be my full-time gig. But I think the truth is, if this were my full-time gig, I would not enjoy it as much as I do now. I think maybe that might go a little ways towards explaining why I'm having some problems motivation-wise for doing anything that's not a live stream. Like the idea right now of putting effort into doing a set for a video doesn't it's not ringing any bells for me. I'm not excited by that. This is true. Like Elliot has a very interesting perspective on things. I'd like to know Elliot better. Hi, Elxie M. I don't know. Maybe I can't. Elliot, I don't know. Oh, I appreciate you upsetting me less. I mean, I should be paying you. Really, at this point. I like parasocial relationships. I like that phrase. Well, this is the majority of what I do the majority of my time. Slim, thick, skinny queen. When I'm not on stream, I often will sit in an empty room and stare into space. Or what I do a lot, and people already know this, I think, but I pace my backyard. Usually with an audiobook, but sometimes not. It's not like a healthy pacing, I don't think. It's sort of a I don't know. Wait, what? I said the username? What? Elliot, I said it. I said the username. I don't know what the username. What? Thick. Wait, what am I missing here? Saying slim, thick, skinny queen. I don't know what I'm missing there. I'm out of touch. All right. At some point, I got to get back to reading this, so I'm gonna get back to reading it now. But I this is what I like. I like having a path, and I think this reflects like the way that I think a lot too. I like to have a path, and then I like to have the freedom to diverge from that path, but always have the path. Well, Elliot, this is what I do. Oh, well, this is just bull, though. I am of average intelligence, average storyness. What? How am I saying it wrong? Is it not slim, thick, skinny queen? Thick. Is there? Do I say that? Do I actually say thick C? I don't know. I'm often the butt of a joke that I'm not aware of, so that I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Right, PG. So I like to have the framework there, and it gives me, it's just like, I don't want to be the anxiety that comes with not having a framework, but then I want to be able to deviate from the framework whenever I want. And I do. So, and I will continue to do it. Oh, it's giving me the option here this is a new option. I'm out of focus here a little bit. Shoot. In the back of my hair, you can see I didn't care so much about the back of my hair. Sleep well, PG. All right. Where were we? All right, so the idea of self-mobilized, the ideas of things that should not exist. And right now going into puppet makers. Oh, we got initially sidetracked by the fact that I put this on here specifically so I could say puppet. For a brief while, let's mull over some items of interest regarding puppets. They are made as they are made by puppet makers and manipulated to behave in certain ways by a puppet master's will. The puppets under discussion here are those made in our image, though never with such fastidiousness that we would mistake them for human beings. If they were so created, their resemblance to our soft shapes would be a strange and awful thing, too strange and awful, in fact, to be countenanced without alarm. Given that alarming people has little to do with merchandising puppets, they are not created so fastidiously in our image that we would mistake them for human beings, except perhaps in the half-light of a dank cellar or cluttered attic. We need to know that puppets are puppets. Nevertheless, we may still be alarmed by them, because if we look at a puppet in a certain way, we may sometimes feel it is looking back, not as a human being looks at us, but as a puppet does. It may even seem to be on the brink of coming to life. In such moments of mild disorientation, a psychological conflict erupts, the dissonance of perception that sends through our being a convulsion of supernatural horror. My hair is fine. What I've noticed, my hairline is so weird. Go away comment. Wait for the comment to go away. Come on. Go away comment. Yeah. Like it comes down a little bit here. Like I almost want to shave this piece here. Because it's really only like underscoring the sort of irregularity of the hairline. Yes, and it should remind you of the uncanny. Yeah. I mean, this is a very large theme of what he's talking about here is the uncanny. In fact, as if summoned by your very mention of the word there, the very next sentence, a sibling term of supernatural horror is the uncanny. Both terms are pertinent in reference to non-human forms that disport human qualities. Both may also refer to seemingly animate forms that are not what they seem, as with the undead, monstrosities of paradox, things that are neither one thing nor another, or more uncannily and more horrifically supernatural, things that are discovered to be two things at once. Whether or not there really are manifestations of the supernatural, they are horrifying to us in concept, since we think ourselves to be living in a natural world, which may be a festival of massacres, but only in a physical rather than a metaphysical purport. This is what... Oh, shoot. Why did I do that? Lost my place. This is why we routinely equate the supernatural with horror. And a puppet possessed of life would exemplify such a horror. Oops, sorry about that. Friends, I gotta get more in frame. At least I don't have a McDonald's hairline. I like the I'm a fan of the McDonald's hairline. I'm a fan of the hair that comes down here and back. I like that. Livia, hello, Livia Lautenschlager. Ah, I remember. I remember your name. Yes, Samantha, the horror of the interstitial monstrosities of paradox. I too like that. A puppet possessed of life would exemplify just such a horror, because it would negate all conceptions of a natural physicalism and affirm a metaphysics of chaos and nightmare. It would still be a puppet, but it would be a puppet with a mind and a will, a human puppet, a paradox more disruptive of sanity than the undead. Maybe debatable, but I think I get it. But that is not how they would see it. Human puppets could not conceive of themselves as being puppets at all, not when they are fixed with a consciousness that excites them into the unshakable sense of being singled out from all other objects in creation, which of course, it's one of the terrible things of consciousness, is we somehow get a sense that we are singled out. Once you begin to feel you are making a go of it on your own, that you are making moves and thinking thoughts which seem to have originated within you, hello, Laura Lanford. Good to see you. It's not possible for you to believe you are anything else other than your own master. As effigies of ourselves, puppets are not equal partners with us in the world. They are actors in a world of their own, one that exists inside of ours and reflects back upon it. What do we see in that reflection? Only what we want to see, what we can stand to see. Through the prophylactic of self-deception, we keep hidden what we do not want to let into our heads, as if we will betray to ourselves a secret too terrible to know. Our lives abound with baffling questions that some attempt to answer, and the rest of us let pass. Naked apes or incarnate angels we may believe ourselves to be, but not human puppets. Of a higher station than these impersonators of our species, we move freely about, and we can speak anytime we like. We believe we are making a go of it on our own, and anyone who contradicts this belief will be taken for a madman, or someone who is attempting to immerse others in a contrivance of horror. How to take seriously a puppet master who has gone over to the other side? When puppets are done with their play, they go back in their boxes. They do not sit in a chair reading a book, their eyes rolling like marbles over its words. They are only objects, like a corpse in a casket. If they ever came to life, our world would be a paradox and a horror in which everything was uncertain, including whether or not we were just human puppets. All supernatural horror derives from what we believe should be and should not be. As scientists, philosophers, and spiritual figures have testified, our heads are full of illusions, things, including human things, that are not dependably what they seem. Yet one thing we know for sure: the difference between what is natural and what is not. Another thing we know is nature makes no blunders so untoward as to allow things, including human things, to swerve into supernaturalism. Were it to make such a blunder, we would do everything in our power to bury this knowledge. But we need not resort to such measures, being as natural as we are. No one can prove that our life in this world is a supernatural horror, nor cause us to suspect that it might be. Anybody can tell you that, not least a contriver of books that premise the supernatural, the uncanny, and the frightfully paradoxical as essential to our nature. The conspiracy against the human race. The nightmare of being. Psychogenesis. For ages they had been without lives of their own. The whole of their being was open to the world, and nothing divided them from the rest of creation. How long had they thus flourished, none of them knew. But then something began to change. It happened over unremembered generations. The signs of a revision without forewarning were being writ ever more deeply into them. As their species moved forward, they began crossing boundaries whose very existence they never imagined. After nightfall, they looked up at a sky filled with stars and felt themselves small and fragile in the vastness. Soon, they began to see everything in a way they had never had in older times. When they found one of their own lying still and stiff, they now stood around the body as if there were something they should do that they had never done before. It was then they began to take bodies that were still and stiff to distant places so that they could not find their way back to them. But even after they had done this, some within their group did see those bodies again, often standing silent in the moonlight, or loitering sad-faced just beyond the glow of a fire. Everything changed once they had lives of their own and knew they had lives of their own. It became impossible for them to believe things had ever been any other way. They were masters of their movements now, as it seemed, and never had there been anything like them. The epoch had passed where the whole of their being was open to the world, and nothing divided them from the rest of creation. Something had happened. They did not know what it was, but they did know it as that which should not be. And something needed to be done if they were to flourish as they once had, if the very ground beneath their feet were not to fall out from under them, for ages they had been without lives of their own. Now that they had such lives, there was no turning back. The whole of their being was closed to the world, and they had been divided from the rest of creation. Nothing could be done about that, having, as they did, lives of their own. But something would have to be done if they were to live with that which should not be. And over time, they discovered what could be done, and what would have to be done, so that they could live the lives that were now theirs to live. This would not revive among them the way things had once been done in older times. It would only be the best they could do. Ante-mortem. For thousands of years, a debate has been going on in the shadowy background of human affairs. The issue to be resolved: what should we say about being alive? Overwhelmingly, people have said, being alive is all right. More thoughtful persons have added, especially when you consider the alternative, disclosing a jocularity as puzzling as it is macabre, since the alternative is here implied to be both disagreeable and, upon consideration, capable of making being alive seem more agreeable than it alternatively would, as if the alternative were only a possibility that may or may not come to pass, like getting the flu, rather than a looming inevitability. It's very true. And yet this covertly portentous remark is perfectly well tolerated by anyone that says being alive is all right. These individuals stand on one side of the debate. On the other side is an imperceptible minority of disputants. Their response to the question of what we should say about being alive will be neither positive nor equivocal. They may even fulminate about how objectionable it is to be alive, or spout off that to be alive is to inhabit a nightmare without a hope of awakening to a natural world, to have our bodies embedded neck deep in a quagmire of dread, to live as shut-ins in a house of horrors from which nobody gets out alive, and so on. Now, there are really no incisive answers as to why anyone thinks or feels one way and not another. The most we can say is that the first group of people is composed of optimists, though they may not think of themselves as such, while the contending group, that imperceptible minority, is composed of pessimists. The latter know who they are. But which group is in the right? The existentially harrowed pessimists or the life-embracing optimists? This will never be resolved. If the most contemplative individuals are sometimes dubious about the value of existence, they do not often publicize their doubts, but align themselves with the optimist in the street, tacitly declaiming in more erudite terms, being alive is all right. The butcher, the baker, the crushing majority of philosophers all agree on one thing: human life is a good thing, and we should keep our species going for as long as we can. To tout the rival side of the issue is asking for grief. But some people seem born to bellyache that being alive is not all right. Should they vent this posture in philosophical or literary works, they may do so without anxiety that their efforts will have an excess of admirers. Notable among such efforts is The Last Messiah, 1933, an essay written by the Norwegian philosopher and man of letters Peter Wessel Zapfe, 1899 to 1990. Some of you may remember I've read The Last Messiah before on stream. In this work, which to date has been twice translated into English, Zapfe elucidated why he saw human existence as a tragedy. Before discussing Zappa's elucidation of human existence as a tragedy, however, it might be useful to muse upon a few facts whose relevance will become manifest down the line. As some may know, there exist readers who treasure philosophical and literary works of a pessimistic, nihilistic, or defeatist nature as indispensable to their existence, hyperbolically speaking. Contrary by temperament, these persons are sorely aware that nothing indispensable to their existence, hyperbolically or literally speaking, must make its way into their lives as if by natural birthright. They do not think anything indispensable to anyone's existence may be claimed as a natural birthright, since the birthrights we toss about are all lies, fabricated to a purpose, as any student of humanity can verify. For those who have given thought to this matter, the only rights we may exercise are these: to seek the survival of our individual bodies, to create more bodies like our own, and to perish from corruption or mortal trauma. Of course, possession of these rights presumes that one has been brought to term and made it to the age of being reproductively ready. Neither of those are a natural birthright. Stringently considered, then, our only natural birthright is a right to die. No other right has ever been allocated to anyone except as a fabrication, whether in modern times or days past. The divine right of kings may now be acknowledged as a fabrication, a falsified permit for prideful dementia and impulsive mayhem. The inalienable rights of certain people, on the other hand, seemingly remain current. Somehow we believe that they are not fabrications because hallowed documents declare they are real. Miserly or munificent as a given right may appear, it denotes no more than the right of way warranted by a traffic light, which does not mean you have the right to drive free of vehicular misadventures. Ask any paramedic as your dead body is taken away to the nearest hospital. Wide awake. Our want of any natural birthright, except to die, in most cases without assistance, is not a matter of tragedy, only one of truth. Coming at last to the pith of Zappa's thought, as it is contained in The Last Messiah, what the Norwegian philosopher saw as the tragedy of human existence had its beginnings when at some stage in our evolution we acquired a damning surplus of consciousness. Indulgence is begged in advance for the present work's profuse entreaties for assent. Or at least suspension of disbelief in this matter. Naturally, it must be owned that there are quarrels amid cognitive psychologists, philosophers of mind, and neuroscientists about what consciousness is. The fact that this question has been around since at least the time of the ancient Greeks and early Buddhists suggests that there is an assumption of consciousness in the human species, and that consciousness has had an effect on the way we exist. For Zappa, the effect was, now quoting, a breach in the very unity of life, a biological paradox, an abomination, an absurdity, an exaggeration of disastrous nature. Life had overshot its target, blowing itself apart. A species had been armed too heavily, by spirit made almighty without, but equally a menace to its own well-being. It was a weapon. It was like a sword without hilt or plate, a two-edged blade cleaving everything. But he who is to wield it must grasp the blade and turn one edge toward himself. Despite his new eyes, man was still rooted in matter, his soul spun into it and subordinated to its blind laws. And yet he could see matter as a stranger, compare himself to all phenomena, see through and locate its vital processes. He comes to nature as an unbidden guest, in vain extending his arms to beg conciliation with his maker. Nature answers no more. It performed a miracle with man, but later did not know him. He has lost his right of residence in the universe, has eaten from the tree of knowledge, and been expelled from paradise. He is mighty in the near world, but curses his might as purchased with his harmony of soul, his innocence, his inner peace in life's embrace. Could there be anything to this pessimistic verbiage, this tirade against the evolution of consciousness? Millennia had passed without much discussion one way or the other on the subject, at least in polite society. And then suddenly comes this barrage from this obscure Norwegian philosopher. What is one to say? For contrast, here are some excerpts from an online interview with the eminent British multidisciplinary thinker Nicholas Humphrey. Consciousness, that is to say, phenomenal experience. So take a break here real quick to just kind of say, when someone talks about a phenomenal experience, they're talking about a consciously, something you experience consciously. I'm just pointing that out because it's one of those philosophical terms that gets kind of bandied about and, is maybe a word that is thought to be more than it is or misunderstood and is actually just sort of a very simple thing like epistemology, right? I like to point those out because those are words that like I had trouble with at some point or another, and wanted to make sure that they were clearly defined. And also, like I feel like a lot of philosophy is. So Richard Feynman was a quantum physicist who wrote a lot. I mean, he was a genius. He is the one who sort of, him and Julian Schnabel, I believe. No, Julian Schwinger. Schnabel is someone else entirely. Julian Schwinger, I believe, formulated the idea of particles that could move backwards in time. I believe it's like, I don't know. I think it's been a while since I've read this, but something like a proton moving backwards in time is a neutron, or a neutron moving backwards in time is a proton, something like that. But he wrote a bunch of books, one called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, one called What Do You Care What Other People Think? And a lot of his books, a lot of the purpose of his writings were to dispel the sort of ivory tower that certain educational institutions or people who hold certain educational degrees or ideas, this sort of purposeful barrier that gets put up to kind of set people apart from others. And in a way, this applies to mathematics as well, calculus in particular. It's almost like these things were, in a way, designed to keep people out, to be exclusionary, to be as difficult to grok as possible. They were not designed to be understood by the masses. And that in itself was sort of like a way of being exclusionary. So Richard Feynman's books, a lot of them would debunk these things and say, here's what this word means, and here's how easy calculus actually is. And quantum physics seems very difficult, and there are parts of it that are very difficult. But if it were explained in an easier to understand way, a lot more people would get it, and then he would explain it in that way. And I guess I feel like those elitist attitudes permeate all, or virtually all, schools of higher thought. Q, academic gatekeeping. So when I run into a word like that, I just like to, I love flowery words, but I love them when you don't need to know what they are. The context almost tells you what they are. I don't love them when they're used as a way to sort of intimidate people who haven't encountered it before. So phenomenology, that's one of them, I think, to me. Maybe not to you. Anyway, consciousness, phenomenal experience, seems in many ways too good to be true. The way we experience the world seems unnecessarily beautiful, unnecessarily rich and strange. Phenomenal experience surely can and does provide the basis for creating a self worth having. And just see what becomes possible, even natural, once this new self is in place. As subjects of something so mysterious and strange, we humans gain new confidence and interest in our own survival, a new interest in other people, too. We begin to be interested in the future, in immortality, and in all sorts of issues to do with how far consciousness extends around us. The more I try to make sense of it, the more I come back to the fact that we've evolved to regard consciousness as a wonderfully good thing in its own right, which could just be because consciousness is a wonderfully good thing in its own right. So that was the quote from Nicholas Humphreys, A Self Worth Having. I don't buy it. Could there be anything to this optimistic verbiage in which consciousness is not a breach in the very unity of life, a biological paradox and abomination and absurdity and exaggeration of disastrous nature, but something that is unnecessarily beautiful, unnecessarily rich and strange, and a wonderfully good thing in its own right, something that makes human existence an unbelievably desirable adventure? Think about it. A British thinker thinks so well of the evolution of consciousness that he cannot contain his gratitude for this turn of events. What is one to say? Both Humphrey and Zapfa are equally passionate about what they have to say, which is not to say that either of them have said anything credible. Whether you think consciousness is to be a benefit or a horror, this is only what you think and nothing else. But even though you cannot demonstrate the truth of what you think, you can at least put it on show and see what an audience thinks. And as he has mentioned in the past, right, certain things can be put on show and they're going to gain an audience, and certain things will not. And as such, we will tend to perpetuate the things that do. Namely, optimistic thinking. Sorry, I have dry mouth here. Brain work. Over the centuries, assorted theories about the nature and workings of consciousness have been put forth. The theory Zapfa implicitly accepted is this: consciousness is connected to the human brain in a way that makes the world appear to us as it appears, and makes us appear to ourselves as we appear, that is, as selves or persons, strung together by memories, sensations, emotions, and so on. This view of a materialistic basis of consciousness with an evolutionary origin may be right or wrong. No one knows exactly what consciousness is, or even if it is at all, a speculation on the matter being debatable to the point of chaos. Nevertheless, most thinkers in this area agree that consciousness is a fact in some way. Accepting consciousness as a given for a sufficiently evolved brain, Zapfa moved on from there, since he was not interested in the debate surrounding the phenomenon as such, but only in the way it quite apparently functions to determine the nature of our species. This was enough for his purposes, which were wholly existential and careless of seeking the technical verities of consciousness. How consciousness happened, since it was not always present in our species, remains as much a mystery in our time as it was in Zapfa's. Well, Zapfa lived till the 90s, till 1990, so not that far back. Just as what was going on, if anything was going on, before the universe came into being, remains a mystery. The same applies to the origin of living forms. However such things may be defined, first there was no life, then there was life. Nature, as it came to be called. As nature proliferated into more complex and various shapes, human organisms eventually entered the world as part of this process. After a time, consciousness happened for these organisms, along with others at lower amplitudes. And it kept on gaining steam as we evolved. On this, nearly all theorists of consciousness agree. Billions of years after Earth made a jump from being lifeless to having life, human beings made a jump from not being conscious or very much conscious to being conscious enough to esteem or condemn the phenomenon. No one knows either how the jump was made or how long it took, although there are theories about both, as there are theories about all mutations from one state to another. The mutations must be considered blind, Zapfa wrote. They work, are thrown forth, without any contact of interest with their environment. As mentioned, how the mutation of consciousness originated was of no concern to Zapfa. He focused entirely on demonstrating the tragic effect of this aptitude. Such projects are typical among pessimistic philosophers. Non-pessimistic philosophers have either an impartial attitude about consciousness or, like Nicholas Humphrey, think of it as a marvelous endowment. When non-pessimistic philosophers even notice the pessimist's attitude, they reject it. With the world on their side, in the conviction that being alive is all right, non-pessimists are not disposed to musing that human existence is a wholesale tragedy. They only argue the fine points of whatever it is about human existence that grabs their attention, which may include the tragic, but not so much that they lose their commitment to the proposition that being alive is all right. He's using that phrase, being alive is all right, like very sort of, almost like a mantra of jibing, like a jibe. And they can do this until the day they die, which is all right by them. Mutation. Established. Consciousness is not often viewed as being an instrument of tragedy in human life. But to Zapfa, consciousness would have long past proved fatal for human beings if we did not do something about it. Why, Zapfa asked. Why, Zapfa asked, has mankind not long ago gone extinct during great epidemics of madness? Why do only a fairly minor number of individuals perish? Because they fail to endure the strain of living, because cognition gives them more than they can carry. Zapfa also proposed an answer. Most people learn to save themselves by artificially limiting the content of consciousness. From an evolutionary viewpoint, in Zapfa's observation, consciousness was a blunder that required corrections for its effects. It was an advantageous outgrowth that made us into a race of contradictory beings, uncanny things that have nothing to do with the rest of creation. Because consciousness, parent of all horrors, because of consciousness, parent of all horrors, we became susceptible to thoughts that were startling and dreadful to us, thoughts that have never been equitably balanced by those that are collected and reassuring. Our minds now begin dredging up horrors, flagrantly joyless possibilities, enough of them to make us drop to the ground in paroxysms of self-soiling consternation, should they go untrammeled. This potentiality necessitated that. I can tell I'm getting tired. When I'm tired, I start to stumble more over words. Laura, ignorance is bliss. I've thought about this a lot, and I feel like that's not enough. I feel like bliss is ignorance is a better way to phrase it. Because you have to be ignorant. If you adopt this philosophy, you have to be ignorant in order to be blissful. But the other way is not, the flip side is not implied, right? You can be ignorant and not be blissful. Not all ignorant people are blissful, but all blissful people must be ignorant. If you subscribe to this ideology, at least, in my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. While a modicum of consciousness may have had survivalist properties during an immemorial chapter of our evolution, so one theory goes, this faculty soon enough became a seditious agent working against us. As Zappa concluded, we need to hamper our consciousness for all we are worth, or it will impose upon us a too clear vision of what we do not want to see, which, as the Norwegian philosopher saw it, along with every other pessimist, is the brotherhood of suffering between everything alive. Whether or not one agrees there is a brotherhood of suffering between everything alive, we can all agree that human beings are the only organisms that can have such a conception of existence, or any conception, period. That we can conceive of the phenomenon of suffering, our own as well as that of other organisms, that's a property unique to us, as a dangerously conscious species. We know there is suffering, and we do take action against it, which includes downplaying it by artificially limiting the content of our consciousness. Between taking action against and downplaying suffering, mainly the latter, most of us do not worry that it has overly sullied our existence. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that is basically the point of this entire book. Q. You thought about dead skin and your brain said one day you'll all be dead skin. Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to touching on that philosophy, the philosophy that was touched on by the cult of self-mutilators in Last Days by Brian Evanson. They were sort of almost like easing themselves into non-existence, which is an interesting way to look at it. One might argue that aging sort of naturally eases you into non-existence as you sort of lose your faculties. You are slower to think. Your sight fails. You, unless you die by some sort of massive single event, you just sort of slowly start winking out bit by bit. I probably can't go on too much more because I'm too tired to read in a way that I think does this justice. As a fact, we cannot give suffering precedence in either our individual or collective lives. We have to get on with things, and those who give precedence to suffering are going to be left behind. Makes sense. Yeah. Like you'd just be seen as, you're overwhelmed with ennui, and you are, what is it? The Britishism for that is malaise. I guess it's not a Britishism, but it's common. Stuck in a state of malaise. Gotta get on with things, or you will be left behind. People who do that fetter us with their sniveling. We have someplace to go, and must believe we can get there, wherever that may be. And to conceive that there is a brotherhood of suffering between everything alive would disable us from getting anywhere. We are preoccupied with the good life, and step by step we are working towards a better life. What we do as a conscious species is set markers for ourselves. Once we reach one marker, we advance to the next. As if we were playing a board game we think will never end, despite the fact that it will, like it or not. And if you are too conscious of not liking it, then you may conceive of yourself as a biological paradox that cannot live with its consciousness and cannot live without it. And in so living and not living, you take your place with the undead and the human puppet. Ah, slim, thick, skinny queen. Yeah, please. It's late here too. Oh, see, Laura, I don't subscribe to this notion. Yeah, I mean, it's all a matter of time scale. Everything will become nothing. Therefore, nothing is immortal. Therefore, it doesn't really matter if you're remembered for 50 years or 500 years. They're equally, I mean, you could say one is incrementally better than the other, but ultimately they both are forgotten. And it doesn't matter what number you put there. 50, 500, 50,000, 5 million. Yeah. Undoing 1. For the rest of Earth's organisms, existence is relatively uncomplicated. Their lives are about 3 things: survival, reproduction, death, and nothing else. But we know too much to content ourselves with surviving, reproducing, and dying and nothing else. We know we are alive, and we know we will die. We also know we will suffer during our lives before suffering, slowly or quickly, as we draw near to death. This is the knowledge we enjoy as the most intelligent organisms to gush from the womb of nature. And being so, we feel shortchanged if there is nothing else for us than to survive, reproduce, and die. We want there to be more to it than that, or to think there is. This is the tragedy. Consciousness has forced us into the paradoxical position of striving to be unself-conscious of what we are, hunks of spoiling flesh on disintegrating bones. Let me say that once more. Consciousness has forced us into the paradoxical position of striving to be unself-conscious of what we are. So, consciousness itself has created the paradox of, in order for us to continue daily through our lives, we need to subdue consciousness so that the world is presented to us in a way that we can be okay with. And one of the things that we need to be unaware of is that we are hunks of spoiling flesh on disintegrating bones. Non-human occupants of this planet are unaware of death. That's not entirely true, right? But I think, broadly speaking. But we are susceptible to startling and dreadful thoughts, and we need some fabulous illusions to take our minds off them. For us, then, life is a confidence trick we must run on ourselves, hoping we don't catch on to any of the monkey business that would leave us stripped of our defense mechanisms, standing stark naked before the silent staring void. To end this self-deception, to free our species of the paradoxical imperative to be and not be conscious, our backs breaking by degrees upon a wheel of lies, we must cease reproducing. Nothing less will do, per Zapfa, although in The Last Messiah, the character after whom the essay is named, does all the talking about human extinction. Elsewhere, Zapfa speaks for himself on the subject. So, this is the crux of the antinatalist philosophy. On balance, human existence causes more suffering. On balance, between suffering and let's say, joy, there is more suffering than there is joy. So if we take the approach that we should minimize suffering as much as possible, the solution from the point of view of the antinatalist is we should cease reproducing and allow humanity to become extinct. Zapfa. The sooner humanity dares to harmonize itself with its biological predicament, the better. And this means to willingly withdraw in contempt for its I don't know, I can't go on much longer. Just as the heat-craving species went extinct when temperatures dropped, to us it is the moral climate of the cosmos that is intolerable, and a two-child policy could make our discontinuance a pain-free one, yet instead we're expanding and succeeding everywhere as necessity has taught us to mutilate the formula in our hearts. Perhaps the most unreasonable effect of such invigorating vulgarization is the doctrine that the individual has a duty to suffer nameless agony and a terrible death if this saves or benefits the rest of his group. Anyone who declines is subjected to doom and death, instead of revulsion being directed at the world order engendering of the situation. I love this. And this applies across so many other, in so many other magistria. This idea that we blame the product and not the root of the cause, right? Yeah, I probably won't go to bed quite soon. It's interesting that he says, though, yeah. So people who decline to take part in this charade, right? They're the ones that get ostracized. This is very similar, if you have ever read Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas, which I'm pretty sure is brought up somewhere, maybe not in this book, but somewhere. But the fact that we have the anger at the person who can no longer, or that maybe it's not anger, but revulsion and kind of like pushing away from those of us who can take it, instead of focusing on the situation itself, we focus on the person. Hey, Skeleton Sinner. Yeah, probably going to wrap up pretty soon here. To any independent observer, this is plainly to juxtapose incommensurable things. No future triumph or metamorphosis can justify the pitiful blighting of a human being against his will. It is upon a pavement of battered destinies that the survivors storm ahead toward new bland sensations and mass deaths. More provocative than astonishing, Zappa's thought is perhaps the most elementary in the history of philosophical pessimism. And so if we were to take the antinatalist bent, if no couple were to have more than 2 children, eventually we would all die. 2.1 mathematically, 2.1 something, I forget what the exact number is, but 2.1 something is the number that we need to sustain, and to expand needs to, anything over that. But this is where the idea of American expansionism and the 2.5 children came from, because in order to grow, we needed to hit that number. Livia. Yeah. I sympathize. I think it's good, if you have the Constitution to be a Stoic about it, then that's admirable. Is it 2.17? I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but you get the point. I feel like I sometimes have the strength and sometimes don't. As penetrable as it is cheerless, it rests on the taboo commonplaces and outlawed truisms, while eschewing the recondite brain twisters of his forerunners, all of whom engaged in the kind of convoluted cerebration. It's an easy one to miss. An R for an L. That for thousands of years has been philosophy's stock in trade. For example, the world is will and representation. Obviously, I'm surprised it took 13 pages to bring up Schopenhauer. By the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, lays out one of the most absorbingly intricate metaphysical systems ever contrived, a quasi-mystical elaboration of a will to live as the hypostasis of reality, a mindless and untiring master of all being, a directionless force that makes everything do what it does, an imbecilic puppeteer that sustains the ruckus of our world. Man, he's got strong feelings about that. A mindless and untiring master of all being, a directionless force that makes everything do what it does, an imbecilic puppeteer that sustains the ruckus of our world. But Schopenhauer's will to live, commendable as it may be as a hypothesis, is too overwrought in the proving to be anything more than an intellectual labyrinth for specialists in perplexity. Comparatively, Zappa's principles are non-technical and could never arouse the passion of professors or practitioners of philosophy. I gotta agree with that. Like, reading Schopenhauer is difficult. For many reasons. One, it's a downer. And two, he does not let up. He goes into painstaking detail to establish his framework of his philosophy. And it's daunting. but I don't know. I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would go so far as to say like Schopenhauer was trying to be. I don't know that I would say that he was trying to be difficult to understand. I don't think that was the case. I think he was pedantic, extremely. I think he was extremely concerned with making sure that every detail of what he was thinking was committed to page, that there was nothing left to chance. And in doing so, it's 1,000 pages plus. So, what do you do about that? Yeah, Zappa's principles are non-technical, right? If we must think, it should be done only in circles outside of which lies the unthinkable. Evidence, while commentators on Schopenhauer's thought have seized upon it as a philosophical system ripe for academic analysis, they do not emphasize that its ideal endpoint, the denial of the will to live, is a construct for the end of human existence. It's true, right? Like Schopenhauer is not, he's a pessimist, but I don't think people generally peg him as an antinatalist. But I could be wrong. I'm sure people just choose to kind of be like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, Schopenhauer's idea is fantastic. This bit over here, don't think about that. Even Schopenhauer himself did not push this aspect of his philosophy to its ideal endpoint, which kept him in fair repute as a philosopher. And there you go, right? Like going back to that idea of if you push an unpalatable idea to the fore, something as unpalatable as the end of humanity, right? You're not going to get much airplay on top 40 radio. So Schopenhauer's, that while he was really, really pedantic about making sure he included everything, perhaps like in that one area, he was aware that he was already making, I mean, he might as well have done it. It's difficult enough to get through as it is. How about that WandaVision finale? How about it? I liked WandaVision. I liked it more before it became a lower budget Marvel movie. And like, it kind of dropped the ball on a few things, I felt like what, some characters didn't get I'm not going to spoil anything, but like Kat Dennings' character, what happened to her? Like she got like a brief mention, I think. I enjoyed the part of WandaVision where there was the mystery. And then once the mystery came out, like once there was this reveal, again, I don't want to spoil anything. Right? There's a reveal of a person. Once this person was revealed, people who have seen it will know what I'm talking about. At that point, I just felt like it was a race to the finish, like a race to, like the last 2 episodes were just, so much happened. Like so much was just like thrown out, explained. No, Skeleton Center, you're saying the same thing here. You gave answers too quickly. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. So Schopenhauer didn't press too much on the idea of letting humanity go gently into that good night. And the conclusion here is that is why he's in fair repute still as a philosopher. I don't know if that's true. Yes, Skeleton Sinner. Yeah. I mean, it still had a few things about it that were more interesting to me than a Marvel movie, but, you know, no, I don't think it had anything to do with the budget. I think it was just like, it's just the way it felt to me. It just felt rushed to me, and to Skeleton Sinner as well. I thought the idea was, and fuck post-credit scenes, and fuck mid-credit scenes, and fuck that whole stupid, ridiculous, annoying as fuck trope. I couldn't stand that. That's one thing I hated about WandaVision, was if you looked at the time left, the credits roll in every episode when there's like 9 minutes left. I just post-credit scenes or credit scenes were interesting when they were interesting, when they were novel and new and interesting. And now they're an annoying trope. I don't want to sit through credits, right? And if people say like, oh, well, it's respectful to the, no, it's fucking not, because I'm not looking at the names. Nobody does. You are honestly telling me like you have a post-credit scene so that people will sit and watch the credits of these hundreds of names going by? That's not what's happening. They're fast forwarding, or if they don't have the ability to fast forward, they're doing something else. Fuck that idea, that whole, if I never have to wonder about a post-credit scene, or in WandaVision, they were having like post-credit scenes and then like mid-post-credit scenes. It was that was really annoying. Anyway. Zombification. As adumbrated above, Zappa arrived at two central determinations regarding humanity's biological predicament. The first was that consciousness had overreached the point of being a sufferable property of our species, and to minimize this problem, we must minimize our consciousness. From the many and various ways this may be done, Zappa chose to home in on four principal strategies. And this is why I want to get to this before ending, because this is the part that I feel is really apt and accurate. So here are the four strategies for coping with consciousness. Good night, Jane Doe. Thank you for coming by. 1. Isolation. So that we may live without going into a free fall of trepidation, we isolate the dire facts of being alive by relegating them to a remote compartment of our minds. They are the lunatic family members in the attic, whose existence we deny in a conspiracy of silence. 2. Anchoring. To stabilize our lives in the tempestuous waters of chaos, we conspire to anchor them in metaphysical and institutional verities: God, morality, natural law, country, family, that inebriate us with a sense of being official, authentic, and safe in our beds. 3. Distraction. To keep our minds unreflective of a world of horrors, we distract them with a world of trifling or momentous trash. The most operant method for furthering the conspiracy, it is in continuous employ and demands only that people keep their eyes on the ball or their television sets, their government's foreign policy, their science projects, their careers, their place in society, their place in the universe, etc. And 4. Sublimation. That we might annul a paralyzing stage fright at what may happen to even the soundest bodies and minds, we sublimate our fears by making an open display of them. In the Zappian sense, sublimation is the rarest technique utilized for conspiring against the human race. putting into play both deviousness and skill. This is what thinkers and artistic types do when they recycle the most demoralizing and unnerving aspects of life as works in which the worst fortunes of humanity are presented in a stylized and removed manner as entertainment. In so many words, these thinkers and artistic types confect products that provide an escape from our suffering by creating a bogus simulation of it, a tragic drama, a philosophical wool gathering, for instance. Zapfa uses The Last Messiah to showcase how a literary philosophical composition cannot perturb its creator or anyone else with the severity of true-to-life horrors, but only provide a pale representation of these horrors, just as King Lear, weeping for his dead daughter Cordelia, cannot rend its audience with the throes of the real thing. By watchful practice of the above connivances, we may keep ourselves from scrutinizing too assiduously the startling and dreadful mishaps that may befall us. These must come as a surprise, for if we expected them, then the conspiracy would not work its magic. Naturally, conspiracy theories seldom pique the curiosity of the right-minded individuals, and they're met with disbelief and denial when they do. Best to immunize your consciousness from any thoughts that are startling and dreadful, so that we can all go on conspiring to survive and reproduce as paradoxical beings, puppets that can walk and talk all by themselves. At worst, keep your startling and dreadful thoughts to yourself. Hearken well. None of us wants to hear spoken the exact anxieties we keep locked up inside ourselves. Smother that urge to go spreading the news of your pain and nightmares around town. Bury your dead. Don't leave a trace. And be sure to get on with things, or we will get on without you. Let me reread that because I butchered it. Hearken well. None of us wants to hear spoken the exact anxieties we keep locked up inside ourselves. Smother that urge to go spreading news of your pain and nightmares around town. Bury your dead, and don't leave a trace. And be sure to get on with things, or we will get on without you. White Noise. Yes, Don DeLillo. It's a great book, White Noise. What? This is so annoying that it does this. There. Yeah, if you have not read the book White Noise, I recommend it. Anyway, so that is part one. We only got like 20 or 30 pages in. It's coming up on 2 a.m. Every entertainment exists to pleasure people. It is amusing because it was made by people. Yep. I'm going to go to bed because I'm tired as hell. Thank you all for joining me for a little while. I appreciate it. And we'll see you all soon, I hope. Hope you all are able to keep your bleakest thoughts at bay using perhaps one of Peter Wessel-Zapfa's 4 methods of allowing yourself to continue to function in a world where you should really be just completely paralyzed by the horror around you. And good night, slim, thick, skinny queen. Q, skeleton sinner, Livia, Laura, Jane Doe, probably went to sleep already. Yeah. Lirio, good night, everybody. And I will see you all around.